Thank you for clicking in too. Explore the far-reaching impacts of the choices we make, one conversation at a time. This is The Ripple Effect. He's brash, bold, and unfiltered. We want to welcome Matthew Granahan today, also known as the King of Connecticut, to our show. We want to have an unforgettable conversation with him. It's sure to be a very interesting one. With that, we want to turn it over to Matthew and see if he can tell us a little about where he grew up and, how he led to where he did in life.
Thank you, guys. Yes, I am known as the pernicious purveyor of preposterous pomposity and paragon of pugilistic punditry, which we'll get to towards the end of the show, our new show that launches on Thanksgiving Day. Yeah, I grew up in what's known as the Golden Sound of Connecticut, Fairfield County, Norwalk, Connecticut, and lived in Connecticut until I was in my early 30s.
Oh, wow.
Been down here in Florida for a few years, bouncing around between here and South Carolina. Have lived in South Carolina for quite a while, and I like the warmer climate. But originally from Connecticut.
Norwalk is right. It's not too far from New York City, right?
40 miles from Manhattan. All right. Some people say I sound like a New Yorker, but I don't know how risque I can be. But the old saying from back home is that we grew up between the mass holes and the. You can do the other math of the New Yorkers.
You can say that. This is a family show.
Mass holes and the assholes. Yeah, but Fairfield County, I'd never moved back there, but it's a great place. I don't like the weather. It's changed a lot since I grew up. I headlined a show for my old high school for my alma mater for the Mats for Norwalk Wrestling back in 2017, and it had changed so much. It didn't feel like home at all. I felt more like the greater D.C. area where I had lived. In Northern Virginia, it was way too crowded, and I went back to my old house that I grew up in, and it just didn't feel the same at all.
But that's also close to the beach line too, right? So you've always been around the beaches and so forth?
Yeah, I'm a beach bum. I love the beach. But we grew up on the Sound, the Long Island Sound. The better beaches in Connecticut are more up around Groton. People will know like where the sub base is up there. That's like the real beach. Where I grew up was right on the Sound, the Strong Island Sound as they call it. Right across from Long Island. You could always take the ferry from Bridgeport to Port Jeffrey, Long Island.
Okay. So your career, you kind of went into like wrestling, MMA, and some of these things. We kind of seen that in your opening line there. You also probably did some, what do you call that, hosting of those events as well?
Yeah, and all those are all hobbies, man. My primary career, I was partner in a distributor, a wine and liquor distributor in South Carolina for many years. And then prior to that, I was a regional manager and divisional director for a group of breweries. And in between there, I ran another distributor in South Carolina. And coming out of college, I was a sales rep and then sales manager and ran the on-premise for Northeast Beverage, which is a big distributor up in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and got into all of the wrestling stuff and MMA. I've always been a competitive wrestler and got into the grappling and all that. And those were all side businesses, but throughout that career, I managed a number of guys as well. Managed a UFC Hall of Famer, one of my best friends, the late great Stefan Bonner, the man who really put the UFC on the map and made them mainstream in 2005. And that led to a tenure that I had as a prime marketing consultant for Bellator MMA. First time we ever beat UFC head-to-head in the ratings was when I set up the Stefan Bonner Tito Ortiz fight for Bellator when they went head-to-head against the UFC in that televised card. I wrote their marketing plan, and I managed Prince of Persia Kamal Shalrus, who was a training partner of mine, big star in UFC and moved him over to ONE. He had the most exciting fight, against Khabib, and also the New York Badass Phil Baroni, and that's sort of become a sad story in recent times because Phil is currently in a Mexican prison, and I used my contacts in the legal world and was able to get him into more of a halfway house situation. If you want to watch the Bravo Films documentary on Phil, I'm in the final installment, and I explain, how he got there, but he was essentially a patsy down there, with the cartels in Mexico. That's a whole other story. We go down that rabbit hole. It could take us the whole show, but yeah, I got involved in the professional wrestling world. Years ago in the late 90s, I was competing in judo, and one of my buddies from Akari Judo in Danbury told me he was a professional wrestler, and I said, man, I always wanted to be a pro wrestler. Just never figured out how to get into it. And he was going to Killer Kowalski school, but what he did is he took me around as his opponent in the late 90s, and that was before the internet. So you could basically have the same opponent over and over again with a lot of these indie shows. And then he kind of got me my start in the professional wrestling, and then went from there. I did the Sheik gimmick for a while, and then I started bringing guys over from MMA to professional wrestling, which is more what I became known for when I brought UFC Hall of Famer Stefan Bonner into pro wrestling, and then to do matches with me. And then the Legends and Vixen show was a really good one. And then I got him into TNA on Spike TV, and got Phil Baroni into the professional wrestling world, Kamal Shalarus. So yeah, I had a cup of coffee in MMA. I competed in MMA a handful of times. I've got my ring here from a Hall of Fame ring for Florida. I went into the Florida MMA Hall of Fame in 2017 at RFC because I was broadcasting for them with King Mo, as I also hosted Gladiator in Florida down in West Palm Beach in South Florida. So did a lot of the competing, cornering. I've cornered hundreds of fights, and the managing and the broadcasting. So kind of had like a broader scope of things that I did, and then what I'm most proud of is with Bellator. Again, with being one of two guys that wrote that marketing plan, and us beating the UFC head to head in the ratings with that Bonner Ortiz fight. Then people will remember we infused a lot of pro wrestling in that. We had Sean McCulley in a mask, who was one of Tito's best friends, and Bonner came up with all that stuff, and one of Bonner's training partners for the actual fight. And if you watch that, the pro wrestling fans say that was better than anything ever done in pro wrestling, because we didn't smarten Tito up. We knew how he was going to react, and he overreacted, and it was great for the cameras. So
Entertainment value.
Yes, great entertainment value.
Now you managed Kamal, and Kamal managed you for a while.
Yeah,
correct?
Yeah.
In UFC.
Yeah, I managed Kamal when he was in WEC. That's actually a great segue to the project I'm working on now, because Kamal's part of that. He was part of Pat Militich's group, and Kamal and I were training partners and roommates in Austin, Texas when he first came to the U.S. And at that time frame, we were training at CTC, which was a Militich fighting system school. UFC Hall of Famer Pat Militich, who many fans will remember had all the belts with Matt Hughes and Tim Sylvia and Jens Pulver during that golden age of MMA, and he was also a champion himself. Well, he was involved with a guy named Monty Cox, who was managing Kamal, and I took Kamal away from them with Pat's help and started managing him myself to give him more individual attention. And then when he went from WEC into the UFC, and he had a shorter tenure in UFC, he had that epic fight against Khabib, but the money really wasn't that great at that time in UFC. And they put you on a 3-fight contract where, you're only fighting 3 times a year, and you actually look at what your pay is after you pay out your corners and everybody, and it's not that good. So from there, I moved him to One, which is actually bigger than the UFC. One FC is is an Asian company, and they are on in Asia. They're on regular TV, not cable, so they're in every home. So their people are huge stars, like in China and the Philippines and throughout Asia. So his pay was much better there. And Kamal's really successful now in the real estate business, but he's actually going to be helping me to produce one of our next shows. We have a TV show in Vegas that's Shoot Pro Wrestling, which is a very unique. It's in the cage. And it's pro wrestling rules, but 100% legitimate. We have a lot of guys who come from collegiate wrestling, international wrestling, and then some even from UFC. UFC, we have a guy, Colin Crandall, who is helping us. He's the MMA Power Hour host. He knows a lot of the current stars in UFC, and he's helping us to book some of the current roster guys because they can compete in grappling for this show, for this TV show. And our debut is going to be on Thanksgiving Day with the new television show that I was associate producer of. I actually brought in and recruited one of the competitors for the show, Brandon Riggins, from my alma mater, from Norwalk High. He was actually coached. He was coached up there by Spiro Papa Cosmos and those guys, and he did phenomenally well. So we have that going on as well. So there's so many different things that everything kind of strings together. You know.
What's the name of this show that you're talking about?
It's called Shoot Pro Wrestling, and people can go to shootprowrestling.com. It's run by two guys, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich and Jake Shannon of Scientific Wrestling. And Scientific Wrestling has been around for 25 years. They're one of the top coaching companies, clinic companies. And they have Wade Chalice, the King of Pins. They have Frank Shamrock. They have Pat Miletich. They have a lot of these coaching camps. And we're doing this television show in conjunction with the Scientific Wrestling, and also in conjunction with Define the Fight, which is a promotion out of North Dakota at the Skydancer Resort and Casino and Balcourt, North Dakota. And that's where we did this last television show. So they actually gave us the cage. It's a brand new cage. And we're not just putting the actual competition, the match, we're telling the story. We're giving you the opportunity to get to know who these guys are. This match is this particular show that's launching Thanksgiving Day. It features a fighter named Blade Ogg, and Blade is one of the top-ranked pro fighters and out of the Dakotas in MMA, but he has a storied history. He's an ex-con. And his opponent is Brandon Riggins, that I recruited, as a police officer in Springfield. So we've got like the criminal versus the cop. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're doing a lot of cool creative stuff like that. And Shoot Pro Wrestling has the rich history too. You know, Jake did a book called Say Uncle, which was very similar to the Rough and Tumble book that Eric Paulson and I wrote, which chronicled the history of professional wrestling and MMA, going from the Gotch Hackenschmidt days and the Shoot days and the carnivals. And you'll see when you watch this television show, the story that we tell on the TV show, it goes back to that history. It's a really cool, fun show.
So you like to seem to dabble in a lot of things. You know, you've been a distributor, business person, wrestling, podcast, broadcaster, author.
I love to cook
producer.
too. I have a cookbook too.
Not to forget,
what don't you do?
You started wrestling at 11. You were coaching at 18, and you were doing judo to help improve your wrestling. So you've been doing this since like day one.
Yeah. I started wrestling in 11 years old in middle school, and I was a rambunctious kid, and wrestling was the best way to kind of harness that in a positive way, you know. And judo, at the time when I did judo, you could attack the legs from a standing position. So there was a lot of wrestlers that were doing judo, and I loved judo because I loved a lot of the upper body stuff and a lot of the throws, and also there were some submissions in judo at that time too. That the judo now it depends what dojo you go to, but it's changed quite a bit. They changed the rules in I think it was 2004 or 5, where you couldn't attack the legs from a standing position. So as wrestlers, what we used to do a lot in judo was to grab the collar and then drive our head in and set up for single and double leg, for takedowns to go after the legs. They changed the rules where you couldn't do that. But yeah, I loved judo. And if it wasn't for me doing judo, I would have probably not gotten into the professional wrestling, because that just kind of happened organically.
So in professional wrestling, you also got some controversy.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some of those bigger controversial things that you did?
Oh, man. Are you thinking about the whole Ric Flair?
Oh, yeah, and the pictures on the phone. I want to hear about that.
Oh, man.
I know you're probably bored of telling it, but one last time.
You got to tell that story, though, because it's like almost 4 years old now. But Ric Flair, if everybody knows the Nature Boy, you got to give a woo, right, for the Nature Boy. And he and I knew him at first in South Carolina, in the Columbia area, when he used to have his boat at a place on Lake Murray, and there was a bar there that he would always kind of hang out at and drown his sorrows, because he was married to this lady Tiffany, and he's been married so many times. And Tiffany she's a beautiful girl, but she was very kind of stuck up and nasty, and that was where I first met Rick. And I had the pleasure of coaching Reed, his son, who tragically passed away with a heroin overdose. And then I was out partying with Rick. I always tell the story about Lake Lanier, when he had his boat with Lake Lanier, and he was out there with Wendy. And he's a wild guy, man. He's, he got the whole thing with the pictures was the lady that I was with, he was very fond of, and he used to always like me to send pictures of her. And Berman wanted to get him on the show. They said, we got to get Rick on. We got to get Rick on the show. So I reached out to Rick, and then he told me start talking to Wendy, which was his wife at the time. And that whole thing got kind of went sideways, because at the same time Rick was telling me, he said, you got any more pictures, any videos? What do you got? Come on, Matt. Step up to the plate here, man. If you want me to come down and do the show, you're gonna have to show me something. So I had pictures of some lovely young ladies. Then one particular video that I sent him, and one afternoon he messages me, and he calls me, actually. He picked up the phone. I remember I was in the middle of something, and I was on the other line. I was driving, and he's like, Matt, you got to tell Wendy you meant to send that video. You meant to send that video to your other friend, right? Not to me. And I said, Rick, come on, man. I got to go. And I flipped over, and I kind of forgot about it. And then that night he started sending me these hateful messages. He was gonna kill me. I'm gonna find out where you live. You're a dead man, and all this stuff. Like he was cutting a pro wrestling promo. And then I started talking to Wendy. We're supposed to have Rick on the show, and we started, flirting. And she was in Rosemary, Florida, and she said come out for some cocktails. And I sent a picture of myself in the pool, and she was all this stuff. So what ended up happening was she split up from Rick right at that time, and then she sent those communications to Rick. And in the middle of the night, Rick's messaging me, and he's threatening me. You stay away from Rosemary. You stay away from Wendy. You're a dead man. So of course, being a personality on the Hannibal TV, I had to kind of use this and we used that as a whole story to get under Rick's skin. But what I wanted Rick to do that people don't understand, and I don't think I've told this on a lot of shows, is my friend Bill Hazelwood. He hosts The Gathering, which is a huge pro wrestling get together in the summer in North Carolina. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to give Rick's Revenge, which would, and we already reached out to, I don't know if you guys remember Arn Anderson from the Four Horsemen. Bill Hazelwood had already reached out to Arn Anderson, and they were on board, and Tully Blanchard was on board. They were going to be there. And the Rick's Revenge would have been not a match. I would have allowed him to give me 25 chops to the chest, and I would have rolled out of the ring, and he could have had, and he wanted nothing to do with it. He said, I don't want anything to do with it. Matter of fact, I went on Kevin Sullivan's podcast, R.I.P. Kevin Sullivan. He's passed away recently, and Rick reached out to Kevin Sullivan and started telling him their friendship was over. How could you have that scumbag on your show? How could you have him on your show? So I've since kind of had people mess with Rick a little bit, because it's kind of fun to do. But he is the nature boy, and I always say, I wish you nothing but the best, Rick. I wish you nothing but the best, and you got to stay out of those Italian restaurants in the afternoon. You saw that. I don't know if you guys saw him out at that Italian restaurant over in Tampa. I think it was in Tampa recently, or out that way, where he got kicked out because he was threatening. He was spilling his drink on some old lady, and threatening the bartender. Yeah, but Rick likes to have a good time, and I say the king. I've been in the booze business for a long time. I don't mind having a cocktail or two, but I usually like to drink the water because it keeps you out of trouble. He keeps you out of trouble, unlike Rick.
And where did the King of Connecticut come from? Is that something you put together?
That was actually something that Chuck Sloan. I got to give Chuck Sloan credit for that in the indies in pro wrestling, because he had his gimmick where he was the guitarist, and really good guitarist and singer, and I had the Elvis jumpsuit and stuff that I was starting to wear, and he challenged me to a karaoke thing. And I came up with the King of Connecticut was actually like the original King of Connecticut was more refined, and it spoke this way, more of an intelligent king, unlike that Southern hillbilly Elvis. So it was more like the King of Connecticut, more like a royal type of northern blue-blooded Elvis. And believe it or not, coming from Fairfield County, Connecticut, or should I say Farfield County, Connecticut, there are many folks who speak with that diction in Darien. And my first girlfriend was a young lady that I had met in Wilton when I was lifeguarding there, and her father spoke like that. He said, "Why don't you and Christy go down to the billiard room, and I will retire for the evening?" So, yeah. So I mean, it's funny because I lived in the South Carolina. Of course, I've been in South Carolina for a long time, and I lived in Virginia, more of the country area of Virginia, and I've lived out in Texas. And for me, coming from Connecticut, it's so much different, because the stereotypes about Connecticut actually are true. When we say we grew up between the moss holes and the oss holes.
Well, you told us about the Flair Wendy situation.
Yeah.
Might as well tell us about the Diva Smasher. Where did that come from?
The Diva Smasher. That was.
First, tell us where the name came from.
That was given to me by the NYBA, by the New York badass Phil Baroni. Gave me that name when we were in
the one in Mexico right now.
Yeah, the one that's currently in some hot water down there in Mexico. And originally, that name was from Sonny, who, it's sad when we talk about a lot of these people. Phil in the Mexican prison.
She's in jail.
Sonny is in jail now. Yeah, originally came from Sonny, because I used to do a lot of the conventions. Back 10, 15 years ago, I did a lot of the wrestling conventions with Phil and with Dan Severn. And I met Deborah and had a wonderful little relationship with Deborah. She was married to Stone Cold Steve Austin, and as well as Sonny, and Sonny was after Deborah, so that was when Phil gave me that Diva Smasher nickname. Yeah, it's crazy though. When we think about these people, Deborah's doing well. She's in Alabama. But Stefan Bonner, so many of them, he kind of lamenting.
That was fentanyl, right?
That's a weird one because I don't know how much I should get into this, but I talked to him the morning that he passed, and I urge folks to listen to the book. We wrote a book together on his life. It's called Chaotic Enlightenment, and you can actually watch the audio book on Johnny Alight's channel. I know it's doing well. It's got over 16,000 downloads where I read our audiobook about the crazy tales of his life. But I probably want to be more reserved and not get into it, but I know personal situation that he was going through those couple days. But out of respect, I guess, for his son, I'm not gonna say. But prior to that, he'd had the broken back, and he was in that long stretch in the hospital, and then what a change physically he had, and from when we did Legends and Vixens was 2019 to 2021 when he had broken his back, and we're going on the 2-year anniversary of his passing on Christmas Eve. Yeah.
Well, with respect to the bucket list, you call it something else. It starts with an F.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to say it. I think we were a family. I don't know. If they all got divorced, and which one would you want to call you? Jenny, Renee, or Mandy? Well, now Wendy, too.
Oh, wait. Say that again. I didn't miss it.
You said I was reading an article about your.
Yeah.
And you said you'd rather Mandy was one of them, Renee was one of them, and Jenny was one of them.
Yeah.
So we can throw Wendy in there now because she's divorced.
Well, I have.
Who would you want to call you?
I got to say this line because I had to say it to Rick. Rick, Wendy. She's a lovely woman, but
she's 40 years past her time. Is that what you said?
Exactly, but she's 2 cup sizes too small and 40 years.
You
too
can't
old
say that on the show.
For this king. Woo! That's it.
All right, enough jabs at Rick. So Mandy, Renee, or Jenny? We'll take Wendy out of that one. Which one would you want to call you?
Well, I'm gonna have to say. Now, when you say Jenny, are you talking about Jenny Santana?
Yeah, they're all the wrestlers.
I'll throw one in there that'll trump them all. Is Jenny Neidhart, Jim the Anvil Neidhart's daughter. She's gorgeous. Gorgeous woman. She actually dated Mauro Ranallo, the bipolar rock and roller. I don't know if you guys know more. That would be shocking if you guys know Mauro Ranallo. No. But Mauro Ranallo, he was the broadcaster for the Tyson fight last weekend. He was the old Pride Fighting Championships broadcaster. I think he did some UFC shows and then WWE broadcaster. But he's not. You wouldn't expect him to be. But he was Jenny Neidhart. Jenny Neidhart is gorgeous. Daughter of Jim the Anvil. But Jenny Santana is beautiful woman too. I've had her on my show at Berman, and then I've also had Renee. You mentioned Lady Renee on as well, and I cooked for both of those ladies. That's another thing I do for our show. I cook for the guests, and I love to cook. And I do have an e-cookbook out there, Cooking with the King, that y'all can check out on Amazon Kindle store as well.
Are there any divas right now in the picture that you would you're considering settling down with, or?
I have my own diva, but I like to keep her private.
No problem. Mm-hmm.
That's respectable. How did you transition from sports to legal and sports issues like CTE?
Well, I had gotten involved with the Berman Law Group, and I want to thank Brad Estra, who's a longtime friend of mine from college years. He helped me get on the executive board with Berman, and they're a unique company. They're number 3 on our executive board is Frank Biden, the current president's brother, and South Florida is a totally different world. It's very unique down there. We have Victoria Vesh from Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues, one of our attorneys. There's a lot of other beautiful female models, and Victoria had co-hosted my show a couple times. So it's a unique world down there. So I got involved with Berman. I started working with them in 2020, and then when Phil's situation happened, I had a really good relationship with Ted Berman, and I reached out to Ted because it was a pretty dismal situation with Phil, and he said, "No problem." He said, "I've got the guys, which is the Garcia Group, Wilfredo Garcia, and Garcia Group is down in Texas, San Antonio, but they also have a lot of DAs that are former DAs in Mexico that are part of their network. So they thought they were just going to get him out. But what ended up happening was, and that's why I urge people, if they want to watch that documentary, the Bravo, they did a really good job on it. I was able to get him to more of a halfway house situation.
Get Teresa?
Yeah, because he was attacked like when he was first in there. And I've talked to Wilfredo a little bit, because I don't want to get too much into it, but I got Phil pro bono, but also I got a number of former UFC fighters involved, and it's separate from the case that's been popularized in the media. But we do it a little differently, which is a number of individual cases with Endeavor, and also do it differently because through their network they know Endeavor really well, and they know Ari Emanuel really well personally. So it's kind of a quiet way of helping to get these guys money, for the fighters that have. Because there wasn't money in UFC. There is now, but there wasn't money in UFC for the longest time.
You mentioned, not to switch gears, but you mentioned Mercer, King Mo, Bonner. Who was your favorite broadcasting partner out of all those? I know there were more.
My favorite by far was Stefan Bonner, the American Psycho, because we were like a comedy team. And there's some clips you can watch online. We had the voice of the Carolinas, Haley Marcolini, doing the Fox Sports ones with us for 864, and we were just playing off each other with a lot of comedy. Bonner was a great comedian, man. He was a lot like Norm Macdonald, very like laid back. He wrote his own material, and that's why I tell people, if you and I think a lot of people have reservations about listening to the Chaotic Enlightenment audiobook because he's passed, but I would tell people don't, because it's hilarious. The stories in there are all hilarious. His brother Johnny called me that New Year's Eve after he had passed, and he said, "Man," he goes, "this thing is awesome. This is like, because he's in a lot of the stories, like from the childhood stories. The way that Bonner's does comedy writing it's great." And there's also a good one called another friend of mine who passed away, was my best friend in the world, Laurent Pinchot, who was an old college buddy of mine, and then he moved to Paris because his wife was Parisian. He was an ultra athlete, and he passed away. His heart exploded. He passed away a little over a year ago.
Oh,
it was awful.
How old was he? Was he young?
50s. Yeah, not old. Yeah, but I mean, now that I've had folks like him and Bonner pass away, when people say young, it's all relative. Everybody's got their expiration date, I guess.
Who was Billy Wicks to you?
Oh, Billy Wicks was a mentor of mine who was almost like a second father to me. He was a great guy. He was an old carny shooter that take on folks from the crowd, and started out with wrestling with McAllister College, but he had so many great hooks, and tricks. He had a school in North Carolina, Carolina Combat academy that I used to go to when I was in Asheville on business, and then we became really good friends. We became so close that he's the one who told me to write the book, the Rough and Tumble book, because I was going out training with Eric Paulson when I was competing, and I mentioned to Eric, I said, Pops, Billy Wicks wants me to write a book, and I told him that the book on the history of the old school shooters and stuff, and Eric said, let's write it together, man. And that was what started us writing that book. We started writing that book 15, 16 years ago, and we just did a nice addendum to it a few years ago that folks can watch, and they can still buy copies of the Rough and Tumble book. But Billy Wicks was a great guy, man. Great mentor. He introduced me to Frankie Kane, too, who was another old school. That guy was a wild guy, man. He had been the great Mephisto in pro wrestling, and he was a sparring partner of Rocky Marciano. And then he had gentlemen's clubs in Florida and Fort Walton Beach, when he was in his 70s. So he was a very interesting guy, man. A real character. And Pops was, too. We called Billy Wicks Pops. Yeah, but we learned a lot from those guys.
Are you still coaching wrestling in Florida?
Yeah.
I think it's the Fighting Edge Gym, is it called?
Yeah, Phil Collins, the Fighting Edge Gym. Phil's a great guy. And I just saw Melissa yesterday, one of the female fighters from there. She makes dog treats. She's made some treats for my dog. They're down in Titusville. And I don't coach there as often anymore. I was doing a class when I was in Florida more often. I was doing a weekly class. But it's a great group down there, man. Robert Cook and Phil Collins, great gym, Fighting Edge. I actually met Phil through another guy that I host a show with down in South Florida, Larry Mazza, who's an old friend that goes way back to a relative of mine, kind of from what they call the life, quote unquote, of Cosa Nostra. And I've interviewed him in the studio and done some features on him as well. And he was a martial artist. He was a kickboxer, and he has two dojos down in the Cocoa Beach area. And he introduced me to Phil Collins, and the reason he introduced me to Phil Collins is because I had done some coaching clinics at Larry's gyms with Dan the Beast Severn, UFC Hall of Famer. So when I used to bring Dan down into the studio to have him in studio, we coordinated some coaching clinics, after that, and then he introduced me to Phil, and that's when I started coaching. That was like almost 4 years ago now. Yeah, and they're great guys over there. Phil's an old timer, man. He's old school. He's an old school kickboxer, and I teach them the grappling for his students.
Have you ever been in a situation wrestling that it turned out? It wasn't kayfabe. It was
professional wrestling.
Yeah, where maybe the guy took it personally, thought that you were, I forget the word, where you were actually going at him.
Well, I can tell you even beyond that. I can tell you in South Carolina. When I started professional wrestling in South Carolina, there's a match on YouTube of me and T.J. Jaworski. T.J. Jaworski was arguably the greatest wrestler ever from University of North Carolina, from the Tar Heels, national champion, undefeated, not taken off his feet his senior year. Here's a little guy. And when I was at the old promotion in Spartanburg, South Carolina, APW, and Boiling Springs, South Carolina, they used to, it's a time-honored thing, and this goes back 20 years, so there could be some promotions that still do it, but it's how The Undertaker, if you ever listen to him on Rogan, how he came into the business with Buzz Sawyer. What I did for them and Chuck Sloan did for them was he would have this thing on Wednesday nights. So you want to be a wrestler, and people would come out and pay, and my job and Chuck Sloan's job was to stretch the guys when they came, and take their money, and then TJ Jaworski came down, and that's when I wrestled him, and he told the folks that came in that TJ was just a referee. He said, "This guy cleans the floor for me. He's a referee." And this will give you a lot of insight into the history of professional wrestling. And then he'd go, and Jay Eagle was an old timer, and he'd go, "Well, y'all want to get in the ring with this kid. He mops the floor for me, and he's my referee. And I tell you, if y'all can get past him, it'll be free today for you." And then TJ would just rip the guys up. And I wrestled TJ, and then there's a story Chuck Sloan told when he came on my show, Old School Shooters, about a match I had with this kid who was in the locker room crying afterwards, saying that I shot on him. Well, if you watch the way I do professional wrestling, and the reason why I bring guys in from the mat and the cage, like Steve Alponi and Stefan Bonner and Phil Baroni, is because the way I do professional wrestling is the old school way, where you have a worked finish or a planned finish, but you're going out and you're wrestling and you're leaving guys openings. Well, this particular kid, he was kind of like caught like a deer in the headlights. So I just wrestled him and pinned him, and then he's in the back in the locker room crying. So it kind of shows you how professional wrestling has changed.
Did you give him an opening and he just didn't take it?
Well, he was just staring at the lights. He got confused. He was staring at the lights. I didn't hurt him or anything. I just rolled him up and pinned him because we had nowhere to go in the match. And then he's like, "Oh, this kid shot on me." And Chuck was saying, Chuck was tough too. Chuck was saying, "Well, that just shows you how these kids have changed." But that was even 10, 11 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, that happens a lot more in the indies than in the big-time professional wrestling, because big-time professional wrestling, they have agents and they have to be much more careful about what they do, But in the indies a lot, you're going to have guys, taking liberties quite a bit because they're making like $30 in a hot dog, So it's a little different.
So one question I did want to ask you is, with the Berman Group, did you somehow get involved with RFK Jr.'s campaign this year?
Yeah, that actually wasn't through Berman, though. That was through Dion Powell. Well, I have to give a shout out to Dion Powell. I've had run some campaigns in the past because I do speech writing, and we ran a campaign for an attorney named Sean Hayes, who was running for councilman in New York City. And Dion and I ran his campaign. So I met Dion through there, and then we got involved in another campaign. And then he was the point person for American Values Super PAC, which was the Bobby Kennedy's, Super PAC. So I was brought in as one of the marketing directors, and I was supposed to be the marketing director for blue-collar voters. Okay. So I had... I brought in Pat Miletich and some other fighters to talk about Bobby, Jake Shields, and both of those guys kind of turned on Bobby at the same time as Dennis Kucinich did, and really the same time I did. Jake Shields even more vocally, if you look at his Twitter, than anybody, but Dennis Kucinich as well, and Pat. I wasn't really that vocal about it because I was I still had a relationship with Dion. But, after October 7th, because we really felt like Bobby was supposed to be the peace candidate. And we really felt like he did a 180 and became like this rabid Zionist, which was really puzzling because I'm a historian and I know the Kennedy family. And if you look at Joe Kennedy was one of the original America First guys. So you wouldn't expect that from Bobby, but I don't know if it has to do with the whole deal with his wife in Hollywood, and if you listen to Bobby before October 7th, he was completely the peace candidate. He was talking about closing a number of bases overseas, getting out of the Ukraine, He's very vocal about the military-industrial complex. And, I mean, let's face it, no matter your politics, if you're going to look at it objectively, the heart and soul, the lifeblood of the military-industrial complex is Zionism and our relationship with Israel and the weapons going back and forth. And Bobby, he did a complete 180. And Dennis Kucinich was the biggest one. And so many of us kind of followed Dennis Kucinich's lead after that and just left Bobby's campaign and left the super PAC. And it was a big news story. I mean, I know Tucker Carlson was talking about it recently on his show about that with Bobby. And I'm trying to remember who his guest. I think it was Max Blumenthal was his guest, and they were talking about that. And they said, you know, it was really bizarre for those of us that believed in Bobby. And I don't believe in being a fan of any politician. I think that's like being a fan of your bartender or your gardener. You know, they're supposed to work for you. But a lot of people really believed in Bobby. And that 180 really changed. And it was kind of weird because if you look at Bobby and Trump, they were going at each other just a couple weeks before Bobby came out and endorsed them. You know, it was bizarre, but
it was probably the brainworm he got from that whale he put on his car.
Yeah.
Eating it. So what you mentioned Zionism a couple times. What is your interest in that? And do you have?
Well, can I tell you a joke? I don't know if this is a pretty.
We can cut it if you don't like it.
Well, if you guys don't like this joke, so it's a little. I wrote this joke because I've done a lot of stand up over the years, and I'll tell you guys. They say, you know, Bobby claims that his voice is. I don't know if there's a PC way for me to tell this joke. They say that his voice is that way because he was vaccine injured. But in the reality is he talks like that because he's got Netanyahu's balls in his mouth.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, we keep that one.
That's a big foreign entanglement right there.
What do you think about the recent ICC?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm not even familiar with that.
The ICC, International Criminal Court.
Oh, with Netanyahu?
Yeah.
I think it's a long time coming for sure. Yeah, I just wasn't familiar with that acronym because people don't realize even within Israel, he's a war criminal. You know, we all know that. You know, every human rights organization recognizes that. But beyond that, he's a criminal within
his own country.
Israel. Yeah, within his own country.
But he does have support within his own country for what he's doing. Just putting it out there.
Oh, no doubt he has support. No doubt he has support, and it's really weird because if you go back and you look at the history of Zionism, Orthodox Jews were never really the truly religious Orthodox Jews were never really on board with the concept of. And we can go back and describe it any way you want, but if you go back and look at when Israel was created, it was actually triple dealing by the British because you had Sykes-Picot with French, and you had Arabs, Palestinians that were already living there. It was promised to them. It was promised to the French and to the Jews. But if you look at the traditional Orthodox Jews, they were never really Zionist. It was much more. And Netanyahu's not really religious. He's more secular. It was much more of a secular movement. But yeah, I think that's a long time coming, like you say, with the ICC. But where do you think that's going to go? Do you think it's going to go anywhere?
No, they don't. The ICC doesn't have any teeth. They don't have a enforcing arm where they can have a police force go get them. They can't. They're disallowed from convicting anybody in absentia. And the only way he's going to go to that court is if he gets nailed in some country that's a member of it, and they ship him there, or his own country arrests him. And maybe that could happen 5 years down the road when he's out of office. But they can submit an arrest warrant, but they can't convict him if he's not actually there. They need a body.
So let me ask you this: when you say I'm not familiar with the term, and as I'm ignorant about ICC, is that the same as Interpol?
No. The ICC. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take it.
It's the International Court of Justice, basically.
Okay.
Or the International Court of Crimes and so forth. But they've arrest warrant is issued, and other than America supporting, even some of NATO is not supporting Israel anymore with some of these things that they're doing. They're agreeing that this is genocide, and only America is the only one supporting and breaking its own laws. I think there's at least 5 laws America is breaking right now. They're not. They have a Foreign Assistance Act that they're breaking, the Arms Export Control Act they're breaking, the War Crimes Act they're breaking. They're breaking the Geneva Convention in a lot of ways. They could basically arrest, and even inciting is a problem for America. Any of these congressmen and president that incites this kind of stuff that's happening with Israel could be charged $500,000 and thrown in jail for 5 years for this. But of course, they're not going to do anything.
They're not going to do it, yeah.
They're going to go ahead and allow them to go ahead and break crimes, make America a pariah as well by supporting this genocide, basically, because it's human rights. And everywhere in the world is agreeing that this is a human rights infringement.
Absolutely.
Except for the people in charge of America right now.
It's crazy because if you were to ask the average American and just say, would you support a law that states that no candidate can receive any money from any individual or group representing any foreign government? The majority of Americans would say, yeah, that sounds like America first to me, right? And people don't realize, I don't know if you guys followed Thomas Massey when he went on Tucker Carlson and talked about AIPAC. It was one of the few times you'll ever hear anybody talk about AIPAC, but he said that every Republican except him had an AIPAC guy that they had to clear everything with before they did it. I think the American people are very ignorant about this, and the propaganda is so strong. They say, that they say if you want to know who rules over you, just figure out who you cannot criticize. And it's potential infringement on free speech, right? Like, my daughter is in her 20s now, early 20s now, and she's we don't agree on everything, but this is one thing that we strongly will agree on because it was in the college campuses, right? But they're trying to quell that free speech. And where did the resistance to the Vietnam War come out of? It came out of the college campuses, right? Like, how did I start to learn about Zionism going back over 30 years ago? It's in college, because when I was in college, I had an ethics class that was like a night class, and they would bring different people in. And the person who they brought in that I listened to, and he had a quote, he was working for Pat Buchanan. A lot of people probably don't remember who Pat Buchanan was. He was on the Republican side, but he was sort of a non-interventionist. And he had a famous quote, and that quote was, Capitol Hill is Israeli-occupied territory. And that was going way back, right? And it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And that's why, I didn't get excited about this presidential election. I don't really get excited about any presidential elections, because it's like George Carlin said, they all have the same owners,
Well, in the Constitution, I think, or in the founding of everything, they had the emoluments act or clause or something of this sort that says you basically can't be getting gifts and different things. And I would think that a large campaign donations from another country would probably fall underneath that. But like the other things, no one's going to enforce any of these things that are there, or these laws that they're breaking, or these things they're doing illegally. So
I did a speech in 2016 for Trump. I don't know if you guys saw that one, and I believe in the whole America First movement, because I believed in the origination of the America First movement going back prior to World War I. And you can talk about how Zionism evolved from there. But a lot of people don't realize that Shelley Adelson funded Trump's campaign this last time. I mean, most people are totally unaware. If you talk to most people about this stuff, and unless they're young people that learned it recently in college, most people are completely clueless because you don't hear this. You don't hear this stuff anywhere, really. I mean, you know, the only guy that had a big platform that's had guests on to talk about it was Tucker, because he had the Christian pastor from Palestine, you know, and that was a great show. But he's not even on TV, and one of the reasons I don't think he's on TV anymore is because he was too against the war machine, you know, and I think it's crazy, man, because it's wild to think that when you go back and you look at American history and whatever you think of our founding fathers, the idea of avoiding foreign entanglements, and now all politicians on both sides are literally owned by a foreign government. It's nuts.
Yeah, that is kind of scary. We see it, and we see that even if a politician or political side doesn't really support them as well, they seem to have a lot more trouble when they're running for office the next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at Thomas Massey. I mean, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but he goes on Tucker and he talks about AIPAC, and then his wife is dead within 2 weeks. You know, I mean, the Mossad is very real. That's, you know, if you go back, and you know, they're trying to destroy Candace Owens now because you have Rashida Tlaib, she's speaking out, AOC speaking out. So you got both sides of politics. You have just a few people, but like they say, you know, if you want to know who rules over you, just figure out who you cannot criticize, because they will eliminate your voice if you do, you know, speak out. And it's kind of wild because I don't think it's an issue that most people even realize. I think I don't think mainstream media will really ever touch it, you know.
No, not when they're funded by certain people. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. So what do you think about the current president and his stand on Israel?
I think if you just look at his son-in-law, you know, just look at Kuchner. I mean, God, his son-in-law's family are illegal. They're part of the illegal settlements, right? In the West Bank. I mean, I don't know if Trump himself is really a Zionist, but I think he's surrounded by Zionists. If you look at some of the people, like he's putting Marco Rubio in there. I mean, you look at some of the people that he's putting in his cabinet now. You know, and this is what I said about Trump. I told you I did the speech for Trump in 2016, and then he said he was going to drain the swamp, and then he got in there, and he started draining the swamp, and he found Mike Pompeo and put these guys from the bottom of the swamp in his John Bolton, and he started putting these guys from the bottom of the swamp in his cabinet. So I don't really have a lot of faith in Trump. You know, I don't have the Trump derangement syndrome. I don't hate the guy like a lot of folks do. But I also don't think he's. I mean, there's a lady at my gym that thinks that Trump is Jesus. She really believes it, and she'll come up next to me when I'm on the elliptical machine, and she'll talk. I just don't say anything. I just smile, and she'll talk about, like, when Trump was shot. Mm-hmm. She was, that reinforced to her that Trump is, and she doesn't say it. She really believes that Trump is Jesus. So I almost kind of wanted to say to her, I mean, you look at the guy's life, like. You know, I mean, he's kind of like your king here, or Ric Flair. He didn't exactly have the you think he's Jesus.
I always thought that for a presidential assassination, that didn't get a whole lot of coverage. He was known for a couple of days, and then it went away. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a reason behind it. I just don't know the reason.
I mean, that was wild. I mean, my God, that was just... I can't really buy into any conspiracy on that, though, because it would be someone was killed right behind him, you know. So I think
because he turned at the perfect second.
Yeah, but it would to try to choreograph. I've got people I know that believe that was. I said, "There's no way in hell you could choreograph that."
No.
That was just that was so wild. Yeah, you're right. And then the other attempt. There were two other attempts, right? The one on the golf course, and then the other one after. Weren't there two other attempts?
There's at least one, and then there's a possible other one that just really didn't seem to get any coverage at all.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if there was an attempt with the guy hiding in the bushes outside his club.
Yeah.
That's the one I believe you're talking about.
Club, right?
The golf. Yeah. I don't know. Did he have a weapon? He had a bag. I don't know if there was a weapon in the bag. I didn't. But that's my point. You don't for actual presidential assassination attempts. You're not hearing a whole lot about it.
A lot about it. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I talked to Charles Faulkner, who is with the police in Philly, and he was an old bronze medalist wrestler. We used to have him on my old show, King's Court, and I talked to him about the assassination attempt, the one everybody talks about, the ear thing, and he said people don't understand what a cluster that is when they have those giant rallies. He said, because you've got federal police, you've got state police, you've got local police. And he said, it's a giant cluster. And he said, you could be a guy that's just like that guy, that's dressed, that's got a rifle, and one law enforcement group might think you're the other might think you're the other. And I'm thinking, that sounds crazy, right? But I mean, maybe that's true. I don't know.
So he has a bag. He's dressed like everybody else, and he's got a ladder. And he puts the ladder against the house, crawls up the ladder, and sets up a position, aiming at the president. Nobody saw that,
and nobody sees. Right?
Of all of those law enforcement agencies you just mentioned, nobody saw that. People saw that. People were pointing and said, "There's a guy climbing up on that roof." There's lots of people, but nobody saw it from the law enforcement agencies. I have a hard time.
And that's what Charles was trying to tell me, because I think he's trying to cover for the agencies. But what he was trying to tell me is one agency might think it's the other might think. They don't know who this guy is from, right? So if you're a Fed, you might think he's a local guy. If you're a state guy, you might think he's a Fed. I mean, I don't know enough about it, really.
Neither do I, but I definitely would question the guy carrying the ladder, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there were people taking videos of the guy. Think about how much different would be right now
if he didn't turn his head,
just an inch away. Yeah, I mean, if he had got him in the temple, like if
that would have been a brainstem. That shot was a brainstem shot. I don't think too many people can actually make that shot, except for very good snipers. Because if you look at the ear where it's at, and his head was turned towards something, that's the back of the brain, medulla, done.
Yeah,
no recovery.
But I think this guy, he doesn't. I don't know much about him, but he didn't seem to be the person with a military background.
No, he's supposedly not even a good shot. Didn't make his high school team, let alone be able to make this kind of shot. I can't make this shot, and I was expert in the military. So
yeah, it's wild. I mean, so do you think that there was another shooter there?
I don't know. Maybe it's luck. I don't know. You know, I'm not going to go into speculation like that. The end result is it didn't happen. It was just something that happened, but I definitely don't believe it was a staged thing.
Well, one thing about Bobby that you got to give Bobby credit for is that he's been very outspoken about his father and his uncle, and particularly about his uncles, you know, about JFK and his assassination, you know, and I don't know if people understand that the Warren Commission wasn't even the final. There was another commission after that, and people that even know the history of, you know, Earl Warren. Bobby gets deep into that stuff.
Is he in favor of the whole conspiracy where it was the CIA in cahoots with the mafia and possibly the Cubans? It wasn't just a lone shooter.
Yeah,
I don't know where he stands. I'll
tell you what, Bobby has a guy that he talks about, that he has dinners with now. This guy is very elderly now, and he was one of the mob guys that was involved in the assassination. And I I've studied that a little bit, but I don't speak about things that I don't know too much about, and that's a subject that I would just encourage people to watch Bobby on. He's been on so many podcasts talking about it, and he gets deep into it. He gets deep into what the CIA's involvement was, what the mob's involvement was.
Does he mention Sam Giancana?
Yes. He mentions Giancana. Yep. He mentions LBJ. He gets deep into it. I mean, you've got so many different, because you've got like Roger Stone, Oliver Stone. Roger Stone puts a lot on LBJ. Bobby has got his own. If folks just Google it, they can listen to him and hear it in his own words, because I don't want to speak for him because I've seen some of them, but I don't remember exactly what he said. But
actually, I don't want to miss this. You've mentioned Zionism a couple times.
Yeah.
And in my mind, you got a couple Zionisms. You have Jewish Zionism and you have Christian Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
Jewish Zionism kind of happened at the turn of the century and into the 40s and 47. I didn't think there was Zionism anymore. They're already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
when you say that, what do you exactly mean by that?
Well, it's interesting because I think that Judaism and Zionism are often conflated. They're two completely different. I think Zionism is far more secular. But I think that what's going on now with the genocide is being promoted through Zionism. I mean, and you mentioned Christian Zionism. I would urge people to listen to Thomas Massey when he was on Tucker talking about what happened to him when he spoke out against AIPAC, how his local Christian church in Kentucky went after him, targeted him and his family, because they engage the local churches. I don't know if you guys saw the clip where it said King of Connecticut goes insane and beats up announcer. If you haven't, you got to see that, because I was at a pay-per-view in South Carolina with the voice of the Carolinas, Bill Hazelwood, and it was in early November, I think, of last year. And I brought back my Sheik character, and I told a joke. And I'm going to tell you guys this joke because it's as we say in pro wrestling, a shoot, where this joke came from. When I say it came from an old Jewish lawyer, and the old Jewish lawyer that it came from is Ted Berman's uncle. And the joke is this: there's an Arab man walking in the desert in the Middle East, and he's panting. All he wants is a drink of water. He's panting, looking for a drink of water. He comes upon a store. He goes into the store, and he's met by the Israeli storekeeper. And he says, "Sir, I just want a drink of water." The Israeli storekeeper says, "We don't sell water here. We sell ties. And it's $95 a tie." And the Arab man says, "I don't want a tie. I just want a drink of water." And the storekeeper says, "You see that sand dune? Walk up to the top of that sand dune. My brother has a restaurant there, and I'm sure he's got plenty of water for you." So the man walks up the hill, up the sand dune. His tongue's hanging out of his mouth. He gets to the restaurant, and he turns around, and he walks back. By the time he gets back to the store, his tongue is on the ground. He opens up the door. And this Israeli shopkeeper says, "Did you talk to my brother? Did he have any water for you?" And the Arab man says, "Your brother told me he does have water at his restaurant, but that I need a tie to get in."
Oh, my God.
And that story was told to me by a Jewish lawyer who's a non-Zionist Jewish lawyer. And we should say that when we talk about Zionism. Dr. Norman Finkelstein, Max Blumenthal, Miko Peled, Glenn Greenwald, just a few of the Jewish folks that stand up against Zionism. And there are many, many more.
So, not to put words in your mouth, you think this movement into the West Bank, Gaza, is more of Zionism and the grabbing of more land as opposed to a reaction to what happened last year with the 1,200 people?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, I think that the whole optic of a concert going on, next to an open air prison isn't very good. I think that the whole Hannibal doctrine of shooting your own people, what Israel does, is not very good. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but I can tell you that my good friend, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich, who's my broadcast partner for Shoot Pro for this Thanksgiving, believes strongly that that was a false flag on October 7th. And I do as well, but I don't want to get into it, but think about Netanyahu, think about his situation as a criminal beyond just being a war criminal, looking at criminal charges. I think it's got false flag written all over it.
Well, if it was a false flag, it's one hell of a false flag. 1,200 people, and they still have 100 people in captivity.
Yeah, and you've got tens of thousands of women and children that have been slaughtered and murdered.
45,000.
Yeah.
And counting.
Yeah. So it got them to the end that they wanted. And I'll just leave it there. It got Israel to the end, Netanyahu to the end.
Meaning, you're saying that it might have been a false flag on Netanyahu's part to perpetuate an excuse or a justification to move into the West, to keep saying West Bank, into Gaza Strip,
yes,
to chop it in half as they did for the most part with respect to land, and possibly as maybe a secondary offshoot from that, maybe get rid of some terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you look at the history with Netanyahu, he propped up Hamas. If you go back with any peace talks with the PLO, even going back to what Clinton, who he said that it was Netanyahu who really broke down those talks. If you go back and you look at the history, just not a good person. I think if there is a Satan or a devil on earth, it would be Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay. For time, I'm going to go ahead and let Jake do what we call rapid fire.
Sure.
That way we know you have somewhere to be here shortly, so Jake will go ahead and ask you some quick questions, and it's just going to be short answers. I'm going to let him do it so it could be quicker instead of us going back and forth.
Yeah, just 10 quick questions.
Sure.
Now you can keep it to one word or a short sentence.
Sure.
If you could wrestle anybody in history, who would you like to?
Frank Gotch.
Favorite MMA fight that you either were a part of or you watched?
Bonner Ortiz, Bellator.
Okay. And Bonner is out of business, isn't it? Or was it taken over by somebody?
Oh, no. Bellator.
Bellator.
Yeah, Bellator still exists, but they're a shell of what they were.
One pro wrestler that you admired while you were growing up?
The Hulkster, brother.
Of course. A workout routine that you go by?
Supersets, back and biceps, chest and triceps, and shoulders and calves.
Funniest wrestling in the ring moment?
Oh, man. George the Animal Steel with the Macho Man Randy Savage. Yeah. Miss Elizabeth, the late Miss Elizabeth.
Late Randy, late Macho Man as well.
Macho Man and late George the Animal. Yeah. Boy, although he was a lot older.
Basically, best legal advice you've given to an athlete?
Best legal advice.
Or the best legal advice for an athlete?
Well, it's not so much legal advice, but with the guys that I managed, it's save and invest your money.
Okay. Favorite traveling place, destination?
Shaka, Sicily.
What's the wildest nickname someone gave you?
The Granimal. That was given to me by my old wrestling coach.
I thought it was going to be the Diva Smasher.
I like the Diva Smasher too. Yes.
Man. All right. Coffee or tea?
Both, although I go more towards tea now.
All right. The biggest myth about being the King of Connecticut?
That I still reside in Connecticut. I haven't lived there in decades.
Okay.
All right. Well, for the time convenience and so forth, if there's anything you need to plug or anything that you would want people to know about you, if you could do that now so our viewers can go ahead and see that.
Sure.
And know what's coming up for you.
Sure. Christmas is coming up. We got my old book, Rough and Tumble, is still for sale at erikpaulson.com. My book, Cooking with the King, is for sale on Amazon Kindle store. And the big one is going to be this Thanksgiving coming up next week. Shoot Pro, Higgins versus Auk. You'll be able to watch it. It'll be coming to the Hannibal TV and to Triller and to Crime and Entertainment and to some podcast platforms, and then coming to Vegas Television on the CW affiliate after the Super Bowl. That'll be our first installment of the TV show, and I work on that company with UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich and the great Jake Shannon, as well as WWE Hall of Famer and my good friend Gerald Briscoe, who he was an executive with the company, but fans will remember him as a stooge, one of Vince McMahon's stooges with Pat Patterson.
Okay. One other thing, since you have so much knowledge and experience within the martial arts and pro wrestling and stuff, do you have any real good tips or real good message for aspiring athletes?
Yeah, definitely it is to I think it depends on the age. Like for youngsters, if they want to get into the combat sports and the MMA, is to start youth wrestling programs early. And for any athletes in general, if they're older, just to enjoy themselves and have fun.
I got one more question.
Go ahead.
If for the regular Joe that wants to learn some self-defense, and you had to give them, there's dozens of them out there, boxing, taekwondo, judo, Pav McGraw, and they could only take one, where would you steer them?
Well, the women's self-defense is a little self-defense is a little different, but self-defense, and I taught women's self-defense. You want to go after the real weak, areas, and I would say if it's specifically self-defense you're looking for, it's not necessarily going to be a martial art. Just take a self-defense class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We want to thank Matthew for coming on. Matthew shared a lot of his life history, his experience, his unique character, and some of his other political beliefs as well. We want to go ahead and thank him for coming on and sharing everything he did with us. And if you want to reach out with him, go ahead and follow up with the comments he made before and how to reach out. And make sure you go ahead and take a look at some of the things that he's promoting coming up in the near future. We want to thank you for coming and viewing this content. We hope that you liked it, that you subscribe, and that you give us any additional comments. And we know that some of the subjects that did come up were a little touchy and so forth. Some people believe in one way or another and have strong beliefs, but we hope that by covering a non-biased perspective that you can at least look at it from a different point of view and make a determination for yourself. But once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.